My child, come closer to the fire. Let the smoke enter your nose and chase away the night spirits. For what I am about to tell you is not a story of laughter. It is a tale that walks with shadows. A tale the elders used to whisper about when the moon hid its face behind the clouds. It is the story of a man who buried his own wife alive for her wealth, and how the earth itself vomited her back to punish him. In a village where the baobab trees touched the sky lived a woman named Amina. Her heart was as generous as the shade of those great trees, and her spirit as bright as the morning sun. Amina was not born into wealth, but she had a gift from the ancestors away with the earth. Every seed she planted grew into a bounty. Every animal she tended multiplied. Her yams were the sweetest, her fabrics the most vibrant. Soon, her storehouses overflowed with grains, and her name was sung by the market women. She became a woman of great wealth, respected and loved by all. And then there was Kofi. Kofi was a man with a tongue smoother than palm oil and eyes that held the promise of 1,000 sunsets. He saw Amina's wealth, not her worth. He saw her land, not her love. He courted her with sweet words and false smiles, and Amina, whose heart knew only honesty, fell for him. She believed his love was as true as her own. They married under the watchful eyes of the village elders, and for a time there was joy. Amina showered Kofi with gifts, built him a fine home, and treated him like a king. She thought her happiness was complete. But greed, my child, is a termite. It eats away at a man's soul from the inside out, leaving nothing but a hollow shell. Kofi grew tired of waiting. He wanted everything, and he wanted it now. He saw Amina not as his wife, but as the only thing standing between him and her riches. A darkness began to coil in his heart, a serpent of pure evil. He started to watch her, not with lao, but with calculation. He measured her steps, he timed her routines, and he planned. Oh, how he planned. One day, Kofi told Amina of a secret place deep in the forest, where a magical herb grew, an herb that could make their crops even more plentiful. Amina, ever trusting, was excited. She packed a small bag and followed her husband, her heart filled with dreams of an even more prosperous future for them both. Kofi led her deeper and deeper into the forest, far from any path, where the trees grew so thick they choked the sunlight. He led her to a freshly dug pit, hidden beneath a blanket of leaves. He said the herb was at the bottom. Amina, without a moment's hesitation, peered into the darkness. And in that moment, Kofi's true face was revealed. With a mighty shove, he pushed her into the pit. Amina cried out, her voice swallowed by the damp earth. She looked up, her eyes wide with betrayal and horror, and saw her husband's face contorted with a triumphant grin. "Forgive me, my love," he sneered, his voice dripping with poison, "but your wealth will be much better in my hands." And then he began to shovel the earth back into the pit. The soil fell on her face, and her hair, filling her mouth as she screamed his name. The weight grew heavier and heavier, the darkness absolute. Her last thought was not of hatred, but of a profound, heartbreaking sorrow. Then, silence. Kofi patawed the ground smooth, covered it with leaves, and walked away without a backward glance, convinced he was now the richest man in the village. But the earth, my child, the earth sees all. It felt the tears of an innocent woman. The spirits of the forest, the ancient ones who dwell in the roots of the trees, were awakened by this terrible act. They saw the purity of Amina's soul and the blackness of Kofi's. As Amina's spirit began to fade, a whisper passed through the soil. The roots of a nearby ancient Iroko tree, a tree that had witnessed centuries of life and death, began to move. They wrapped themselves around Amina's body, not to crush her, but to hold her. They pushed the soil away from her face, creating a pocket of air. They fed her with the life force of the earth itself, keeping her suspended in a state between life and death. For 7 days and 7 nights, she lay in the belly of the earth, nurtured by the spirits who refused to let such evil triumph. Back in the village, Kofi played the part of the grieving husband perfectly. He wept crocodile tears, tore his clothes, and told everyone that his beloved Amina had been taken by a wild beast in the forest. The village mourned with him. They mourned the loss of their kind and generous matriarch. Kofi, meanwhile, began his reign. He took control of Amina's storehouses, sold her fabrics, and spent her money on palm wine and lavish parties. He became arrogant and cruel, treating the villagers who once respected him with disdain. He thought he had won. He thought he was untouchable. On the 8th day, the earth had had enough. It rumbled, not with an earthquake, but with a deep, sacred anger. The ground where Amina was buried split open, and the Iroko roots gently lifted her out. She was no longer the same woman. Her skin was the color of rich soil. Her hair was woven with roots and leaves, and her eyes burned with the cold fire of the underworld. She was no longer just Amina. She was a spirit of vengeance, returned from the grave. She was not a ghost. She was something more. She was the wrath of the land itself, given human form. She walked back to the village, not on the path, but through the forest, and the animals bowed their heads as she passed. When she reached the edge of the village, it was night. The moon was full and bright, illuminating her earthen form. She went straight to the home she had built, the home now occupied by her murderer. Kofi was in the middle of a feast, laughing and boasting of his newfound wealth. The drums were beating, the people were dancing, and then she appeared at the doorway. A collective gasp sucked the air from the courtyard. The drumming stopped, the laughter died. All eyes turned to the figure standing in the shadows. At first, they didn't recognize her. Then, someone whispered her name. Amina. Kofi's face turned white as ash. The calabash of wine fell from his trembling hands, splashing at his feet. It was impossible. He had buried her. He had felt the last of her life being extinguished beneath tons of soil. He stammered, You can't be here. You're dead. Amina took a step forward, and another, her bare feet making no sound on the ground. Her voice was not her own. It was the rustle of leaves, the cracking of dry earth, the whisper of the wind through a graveyard. You are right, husband, she said, the words echoing with an otherworldly power. The woman you married is dead. You killed her. I am what you have created. I am your reckoning. Panic erupted. People screamed and fled, trampling each other to get away from the resurrected woman. Kofi was frozen in terror. He tried to run, but his feet felt as if they were rooted to the ground. Amina walked slowly, deliberately towards him. With every step she took, the ground around Kofi began to soften, turning to mud. He started to sink. He cried for help, but his former friends were gone. He was alone with the woman he had sent to her grave. You loved my wealth more than my life, Amina's voice boomed. You wanted the earth's bounty, then the earth will have you. The mud rose to his knees, then his waist. He clawed at the air, his face a mask of pure terror, begging for a mercy he had never shown. Amina, please, forgive me. Shriek. She simply stared at him with her cold, burning eyes. The earth does not forgive a man who poisons its gifts, she replied. The mud reached his chest, his neck. He gave one last, gurgling cry as the mud closed over his head, swallowing him whole. The ground became firm again, leaving no trace that Kofi had ever stood there. Amina stood alone in the silent courtyard. She looked at the home, the storehouses, the wealth that had cost her everything. She felt nothing. Her work was done. She turned her back on the village and walked back into the forest from whence she came. They say she never returned, that she became a guardian spirit of the forest, a protector of the innocent and a punisher of the greedy. And sometimes, on a quiet night, if you listen closely, you can still hear her whispering on the wind, a timeless warning to all who would let greed consume their souls. So, my child, remember the story of Amina and Kofi. Remember that what you do in the dark will always be brought to the light. Greed may bring you temporary riches, but justice, even if it has to crawl from the grave, will always have the final say. Thank you for listening. If this story spoke to your spirit, please consider subscribing for more tales from the embers of the fire. Stay safe, and always choose kindness. In the village of Obongbai, long before the white man's road cut through the forest, there lived a woman named Namdili, her name meant what is mine is beautiful. And truly, she was blessed. Her beauty was not just in her face, but in her spirit. She owned lands from her late father, 3 big farms of cassava, yam, and palm trees. Her late father, a wise hunter, had left her riches hidden in calabashes buried deep in her huta kind of wealth that made even chiefs bow their heads when she spoke. When she married Okoro, the villagers danced for 7 days. They say Namdili has found a man who will protect her heart. But they did not know that some men wear love like a wrapper easy to remove when the sun becomes hot. Okoro was handsome, smooth with words, and strong in body, but his eyes were like the eyes of a hawk always searching, always wanting more. He married Namdili not for love, but for what she carried. Her father's gold, her fertile lands, and the respect her name commanded. At first, Namdili did not see it. She was a woman of faith and kindness, and when she cooked, she served her husband with both hands. When he fell sick, she stayed by his side. When he failed at trade, she gave him money to start again. But the more she gave, the more his heart hardened. Because, my child, when love is one-sided, the giver turns into a fool. In the eyes of the greedy, soon, Okoro's true colors began to show, like a chameleon changing its skin. He would come home late, smelling of palm wine and the cheap perfume of other women. When Namdili asked where he had been, he will dies, "Are you my mother?" to question me. A woman's place is to keep the home, not to watch her husband's every step. He started selling her produce at the market and keeping the money for himself. He took the best yams from her barn to gift the families of his new lovers. And Namdili's heart began to crack, piece by piece. The laughter that once filled her hut was replaced by the silent tears she cried into her pillow at night. One evening, after a terrible argument, Okoro raised his hand and struck her. The slap echoed in the quiet hut, not just on her cheek, but deep in her soul. It was the first time, but Namdili knew it would not be the last. The villagers began to whisper. "See how Nkemdili's light has dimmed," one would say. "Her husband is eating her fortune like a termite eats wood," another would add. But no one dared to interfere. In their custom, a husband's house was his kingdom, and his wife was his subject. Namdili felt utterly alone, trapped in a cage she had helped to build with her own love and trust. Her friends tried to warn her. Her closest friend, Adana, came to her one afternoon as she was pounding yam. "Namdili," she said softly, "a man who does not see your worth will only see what he can take from you. Your father left you wealth to build your life, not to be squandered by a man with no honor." Namdili just shook her head, tears rolling down her face. "But he is my husband," she whispered. "The gods have bound us together," Adana sagayed. "The gods give us choice, my friend. They do not tie a goat to a leopard." The final straw came during the New Yam Festival. It was a time of celebration, a time for families to give thanks for a bountiful harvest. Namdili had spent weeks preparing. She harvested her finest yams, brewed the sweetest palm wine, and prepared a feast fit for a king. She hoped this gesture would soften Okoro's heart and remind him of the good woman he had married. But when Okoro arrived, he was not alone. He walked in with a younger woman, Amara, whose eyes were as bold and greedy as his own. He introduced her not as a guest, but as his second wife. The villagers gasped. Namdili stood frozen, the ladle in her hand, dropping to the ground with a loud clatter. Her world shattered. All the love, all the sacrifice, all the pain it had all been for a man who saw her as nothing more than a stepping stone. That night, as Okoro and his new bride celebrated in the main hut, Namdili sat alone in her old room. The pain in her heart was a physical thing, a heavy stone pressing down on her chest. She looked at her reflection in a bowl of water and saw not the vibrant woman she once was, but a ghost, a shadow of her former self. In that moment of profound despair, something shifted within her. She remembered her father's words before he died. He had told her, "Namdili, your name is your power. What is yours is beautiful, and no one can take its beauty away unless you allow it." She remembered the strength in her father's eyes, the wisdom in his voice. She was the daughter of a great hunter, the owner of fertile lands, the keeper of immense wealth. Why was she letting this man reduce her to ashes? A fire ignited in her spirit, a fire that had been dormant for too long. She would not be a victim. She would not let Okoro destroy the legacy her father had left for her. She stood up, her back straight, her chin held high. The tears stopped. Her eyes, once clouded with sorrow, now shone with a fierce determination. She was Namdili, and it was time to reclaim what was hers. She walked to the corner of her hut and began to dig. She dug past the packed earth until her fingers hit the smooth surface of the first calabash. Her father's gold, her future. Namdili worked through the night, her spirit renewed with each calabash of gold she unearthed. She packed her most precious belongings, her father's hunting spear, and the small bag of seeds her mother had given her. Before the first rooster crowed, she was gone. She didn't leave a note. She didn't say a word. Her absence was her message. She walked for days, her feet sore, but her heart light. She journeyed to a distant village, a place where no one knew her name or her story. With her father's gold, she bought a small piece of land near a flowing river. She was no longer Namdili, the wife of Okoro. She was just Namdili, a woman ready to build a new life from the ground up. She planted her seeds, built a small hut, and began to trade. Her kindness and sharp mind quickly earned her respect. She taught the village children stories, helped other women with their farms, and her laughter, once lost, returned, richer and more beautiful than before. Back in Obongbai, Okoro woke up to an empty hut. At first, he was angry, then smug. She will be back, he boasted to Amara. Where else can she go? But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Namdili did not return. Okoro's fortune began to dwindle. Without Nkandili's hard work, the farms yielded less. Without her money, his trades failed. Amara, who had married him for his perceived wealth, grew tired of his failures. She was a taker, not a builder. Their arguments became loud and frequent. The respect the villagers had for Okoro, which was really just the reflection of Nkandili's grace, vanished completely. They saw him for what he was, a hollow man, a parasite who had killed his host. He became a cautionary tale, a man who had held gold in his hands and let it slip through his fingers like sand. His once proud strut was replaced by a slumped walk of a defeated man. He had gained a new wife, but lost his soul, his honor, and the greatest treasure he ever had. Gyer Spaset Namdili flourished. Her small farm grew into a large estate. Her wisdom became legendary in her new village. She never remarried, but she was never lonely. She adopted orphan children and raised them as her own, teaching them the importance of self-worth and kindness. One day, a traveler from Obongbai passed through her village and recognized her. He returned to his home with stories of a powerful, wealthy woman who looked like the long-lost Nkandili. Word reached Okoro. Consumed by regret and poverty, he journeyed to find her. He found her sitting under a large mango tree, surrounded by laughing children. She looked regal, her spirits shining brighter than ever. He fell to his knees, begging for forgiveness, pleading for her to take him back. Namdili looked at the broken man before her, a man she had once loved with all her heart. There was no hatred in her eyes, only a calm pity. She spoke, her voice clear and strong. Okoro, I forgave you a long time ago. Not for you, but for myself. I had to let go of the pain to find my peace. But what was broken cannot be mended. You did not value the woman I was, and you do not deserve the woman I have become. Go in peace. She turned back to the children, her past a closed chapter, her future a story she was writing herself. Namdili, the woman of gold, had learned that her true wealth was not in the calabashes buried in the ground, but in the unbreakable strength of her own spirit. Thank you for listening to this story. If it resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales of wisdom and strength. We'll see you in the next video. Once upon a time, in a land where the earth was rich and the stories were richer, there lived a woman named Namdili. She was not just any woman. She was a force of nature, a river of ambition that carved its own path. While other girls her age were learning to weave baskets, Namdili was learning the language of the soil. She could look at a piece of land and see its future, see the yams growing plump and the cassava stretching tall. Her hands, though delicate, were instruments of creation, turning fallow fields into sprawling farms that fed the entire village and beyond. Her wealth grew, not by magic, but by sweat. By waking before the rooster crowed and sleeping long after the crickets began their nightly song. She was a testament to the power of a determined spirit. Men came from far and wide, not just to admire her beauty, but to marvel at her success. They saw her not just as a woman, but as a queen who had built her own kingdom from the ground up. Among these men was Okoro. He was handsome, with a smile that could charm the bees from their hives. But where Nkemdili's hands built, Okoro's hands sought comfort. Where her mind planned harvests, his mind planned leisure. He saw in Nkemdili not just a wife, but an opportunity, a shortcut to a life of respect and ease he had always craved but never earned. Nkemdili, for all her wisdom in the ways of the earth, was a novice in the treacherous landscapes of the human heart. She saw Okoro's charm and mistook it for strength. She saw his admiration and believed it was love. When he asked for her hand in marriage, she agreed, dreaming of a partner to share her life with, to build an even greater future together. And so, they were wed. The entire village celebrated, hailing them as the perfect couple, the queen of the harvest and her handsome king. But a crown not earned often feels heavy, and a throne not built can feel precarious. Okoro moved into Nkemdili's magnificent home, wore the fine clothes her money bought, and ate the lavish food her farms produced. He was, by all accounts, living a life of luxury, yet a seed of discontent began to sprout within him. When they walked through the market, the traders would greet Nkemdili with deep respect, calling her the great provider. To Okoro, they would offer a simple, polite nod. He was the husband of the great Nkemdili, an accessory to her success, a shadow cast by her brilliant light. This gnawed at him, chipping away at his pride day by day. One evening, with the moon hanging in the sky like a perfect silver coin, Okoro sought solace at the palm wine tapper's hut. He needed to escape the silent judgment he felt in his own home. There, amidst the low hum of conversation and the sweet, fermented scent of wine, he sat with his old friend. Now, Ikena was a man whose tongue was known to be sharper than a freshly honed machete, and his words, often soaked in palm wine, could cut deep. They drank in silence for a while, the gourds clinking softly. Then Ikena leaned in, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Okoro," he began, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Tell me something, my friend. How does it feel? How does it feel to live in a house that is not yours? To spend money that you did not earn?" Okoro bristled. "It is my house. I am her husband." Ikena let out a short, bitter laugh. "Her husband? Yes, but the master of the house? Everyone knows Okoro. Everyone whispers, they say. All that land, all that money, it all belongs to her. You, my friend," he paused for effect, taking a long sip from his gourd, "you are just her houseboy, with a wedding ring." The word houseboy struck Okoro like a physical blow. It was the word he feared most, the one that echoed his deepest insecurities. He slammed his gourd down, the wine splashing onto the dusty floor. He frowned, his jaw tight. He gulped down the rest of his drink and spat forcefully. "Do not call me a houseboy." Ikena's expression didn't soften. Instead, it hardened with a look of mock pity. "Then act like a man," he hissed, his voice dropping lower. "Are you a man, or are you a mouse living in the walls of her palace? A man takes what is his. He rules his own home." He leaned even closer, his breath smelling of wine and mischief. "Think about it. If she were to have an accident, if she were to meet an untimely end, everything becomes yours, all of it. The land, the money, the respect. Or have you forgotten that a widow doesn't live forever?" The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. A widow doesn't live forever. The phrase coiled around Okoro's mind, a venomous snake sinking its fangs deep into his soul. He said nothing more to Ikena. He paid for his wine and walked home under the silent, watchful moon, each step heavier than the last. Ikana's words were no longer just words. They were seeds, planted in the fertile ground of his resentment. That night, as he lay in the large, comfortable bed beside Namdili, sleep refused to come. His eyes were wide open in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. Beside him, Namdili slept the peaceful sleep of the just and the weary. Her soft, rhythmic breathing, a sound that once might have been comforting, now grated on his nerves. It sounded like contentment, a contentment he did not share. Her peace irritated him. It felt like a mockery of his own inner turmoil. As the hours crept by, the wicked seeds Ikina had planted began to sprout. He started to imagine it, a life without Namdili. He pictured himself as the sole master of the house, of the sprawling farms. He saw the villagers bowing to him, calling his name with reverence. He heard the market traders hailing him, Okoro, the great provider. In this fantasy, the respect was his, earned not by labor, but by inheritance. The wealth was his, controlled by his hand alone. It was a life where he was no longer a shadow, but the sun itself. The thought was intoxicating. It was a dark, sweet poison that spread through his veins, quieting his insecurities and feeding his pride. He didn't think of the woman beside him, the woman who had chosen him, who had shared her life and her world with him. He saw only an obstacle, a placeholder, the one thing standing between him and the life he felt he deserved. And that, my friends, is how the most terrible of evils often begins. It does not always start with a roar of thunder or the flash of a blade. It doesn't begin with a scream in the night or a declaration of war. No. True evil often begins much more quietly. It starts as a whisper in a dark corner, a suggestion planted in a discontented heart. It takes root as a quiet thought, a secret fantasy that is nurtured in the silence of one's own mind, a thought that you visit again and again, until it feels less like a thought and more like a plan. A quiet thought that simply refuses to die. This story is a powerful reminder that our thoughts shape our reality. The seeds of bitterness and resentment, if we allow them to be planted and watered, can grow into monstrous trees with poisonous fruit. It is a call to be mindful of the company we keep and the words we allow into our hearts. Ikina was not just a friend, he was a tempter, giving voice to the darkness Okoro already felt. It also speaks to the nature of true strength and respect. Namdali earned earths through hard work and contribution. Okoro, seeking a shortcut, was tempted down a path that could only lead to ruin, because respect that is stolen is never truly owned. It's a fragile mask that can be shattered by the slightest truth. What do you think? Was Okoro solely to blame? Or was Ikina the true villain of this story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. It's a complex question about influence, responsibility, and the darkness that can lurk within the human heart. Thank you so much for watching and for being part of this conversation. If you found this story thought-provoking, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales that make us think. Until next time, stay mindful and take care. Weeks later, a strange sickness fell upon Namdila. It was as if life itself was being drained from her. Her vibrant skin turned pale and waxy. Her voice, once full of laughter, became a faint, weak whisper. Her eyes, which used to sparkle like the morning sun on the river, grew dim and clouded. The village herbalist, a man wise in the ways of leaves and roots, examined her. He shook his head, his face grim. "It is the curse of the jealous," he declared, his voice low. "Someone envies her light and wishes for her darkness. Someone wishes her death." Hearing this, Okoro put on a masterful performance of a concerned husband. He rushed to her side, his face a mask of worry. He brought her bundles of herbs, promising they were the strongest remedies the forest had to offer. But his care was a lie, a cruel deception. Mixed in with the healing leaves was a dark, fine powder, a secret gift from his accomplice. This was no ordinary substance. It was a potent poison, carefully extracted from the roots of the dreaded Aikpa tree. A venom so powerful it was known to silence even a stubborn goat in mere minutes. Okoro watched, finding Ope, as Namdili drank the bitter herbal tea, day after day. With each sip, she was unknowingly drinking her own demise. The poison worked slowly, insidiously, deepening her sickness until she was a shadow of her former self. One moonless night, the poison finally overwhelmed her. She gasped. Her body went limp, and she fainted, collapsing onto her sleeping mat. Her breathing, already shallow, slowed to an almost imperceptible rhythm. Okoro, ever watchful, crept to her side. He touched her skin. It was cold, eerily cold. A triumphant, wicked smile flickered across his face. He didn't wait for the priest to be summoned. He didn't bother to call her family to her side for their final goodbyes. Instead, he burst out of the hut, his voice filled with a convincing, theatrical sorrow, and shouted through the sleeping village, "My wife is dead. Namdili is gone." His grief was so loud, so seemingly profound, that no one questioned him. Before the first light of dawn painted the sky, he had already gathered a few men from the village. He plied them with generous gourds of palm wine, dulling their senses and their suspicions. Under the influence of the wine and Okoro's urgent pleas to honor the dead swiftly, they followed him. Together, they carried Nkemdili's still, cold body to the small patch of land behind her own hut. With hurried, heavy thuds of their hoes, they dug a shallow grave. The earth, damp and red, swallowed her whole before the village rooster had even crowed its second welcome to the new day. But there was a terrible, horrifying truth that Okoro, in his haste, had overlooked. Namdili was not dead. Down in that dark, suffocating grave, beneath the heavy weight of wet soil, a faint, stubborn pulse still beat within her chest. Trapped in the ultimate nightmare, consciousness began to flicker back. Her fingers, weak but desperate, clawed at the packed earth above her. Her mouth, filled with dirt, opened in a silent, desperate gasp for air that would not come. The last ounce of her life was a frantic, primal struggle against being buried alive. It was a cry of pure terror, unheard by human ears. But the gods, they heard it. They heard her final, silent scream before the darkness finally, completely, took her. And in that moment of ultimate betrayal and injustice, from the depths of that profane grave, something ancient, something vengeful, woke up. The earth itself had witnessed the crime, and it would not forget. Namdili was gone, but what was about to rise from her grave would be something else entirely. They say 3 nights passed before the earth began to tremble. In the village of Umyofia, a quiet disquiet settled in the air, thick and heavy like the harmattan fog. The dogs, usually boisterous and territorial, howled at shadows that weren't there, their cries echoing a primal fear. Babies, who should have been dreaming sweet dreams, cried fitfully in their sleep, their tiny bodies shuddering for no reason their mothers could understand. It was a time of unease, a silent warning that the very ground beneath their feet was holding its breath. And then, on the 3rd night, as the first rooster crowed its lonely call to a reluctant dawn, it happened. The ground behind Okoro's hut, a patch of land he'd recently tilled with unusual vigor, didn't just tremble. It violently cracked open. The earth itself seemed to retch, vomiting clouds of dust and ancient soil into the air. A smell, acrid and foul, filled the night. A smell of smoke, decay, and death. It clung to the thatch of the huts and burned in the nostrils of anyone unfortunate enough to be awake. From that newly opened grave, something began to move. A hand, then an arm, then a head emerged, crawling out of the earth like a nightmare-given form. It was Namdi. But it was not the Namdali the village had known and loved. Her long, beautiful hair was now a tangled mess of dirt and grasping roots. Her eyes, once warm and full of life, now glowed with an eerie, unsettling light, like fireflies trapped in the hollows of a skull. Her skin, once the rich color of baked clay, was no longer flesh. It was the color of cold ash, stretched taut over her bones. She pulled her body from the earth, the movement slow and deliberate, a horrifying parody of birth. She stood, a spectral figure against the pale moonlight, the tattered remains of her burial shroud fluttering around her. A profound silence fell over the village, as if even the crickets had ceased their chirping. And then she spoke. Her voice was not a shout, but a whisper that carried the terrifying rumble of distant thunder. Okoro, she rasped, the name a curse on her ashen lips. You buried me for my money. Now the earth has sent me back to collect my debt. That very night, the world seemed to scream with her. A furious wind tore through the village, a gale with no storm to birth it. It howled like a banshee, ripping at doors and rattling windows. Mighty palm trees, which had stood for generations, bent and swayed as if under the hand of an unseen giant. The river, the lifeblood of Umuofia, the place where children played and women fetched water, turned as black as ink, its surface still and lifeless. And Okoro, the man at the center of this maelstrom, was oblivious. He was deep in a contented sleep, his dreams filled with visions of the life and Skamdili's stolen wealth would bring him. He dreamed of feasts where he was the guest of honor, of new wives and overflowing barns, of the respect and envy of his peers. He had married Namdili, the wealthiest woman in the village, not for love, but for the chests of gold and beads she had inherited. And when her quiet generosity became an obstacle to his greed, he had silenced her, burying her behind his hut with the same hands that had once pledged to protect her. He believed his secret was safe, buried under 6 feet of soil, but his peaceful, greedy dreams were shattered by a sound. A slow, deliberate, scraping sound that sent a jolt of ice through his veins. It was the creak of his compound gate swinging open. Okoro lay frozen on his mat, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had barred that gate himself. He lived alone. There was no wind strong enough to unlatch the heavy wooden bolt. Yet, he had heard it. The unmistakable groan of wood on wood, an invitation to something from the outside, something that was now inside his compound. He strained his ears, listening past the pounding of his own blood. Footsteps. Not the firm, solid steps of a living person. These were slow, dragging sounds. A soft, rhythmic scrape. Scrape, scrape across the packed earth of his courtyard. The sound of someone, or something, whose feet were not quite lifting off the ground. The sound was coming closer. Closer to his hut, closer to his door. Panic seized Okoro. He scrambled up from his mat, his mind racing. A thief. An animal. But the chilling whisper he'd half heard on the wind returned to him. The name Okoro echoing in his memory. It couldn't be. It was impossible. He had made sure. He had watched the life leave her eyes. He had filled the grave himself. The scraping stopped. It stopped right outside his door. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any sound. Okoro held his breath, his eyes wide in the darkness, fixed on the simple wooden door that separated him from the night. Then came a new sound. A soft, faint scratching, like fingernails dragging slowly down the wood. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Okoro, the voice whispered again, and this time it was not a memory. It was right there, on the other side of the door. It was in Kemdili's voice, but twisted, broken, filled with the cold of the grave. Let me in, my husband. I have come for what is mine. Okoro stumbled backward, his hand flying to his mouth to stifle a scream. His eyes dotted around the small hut, searching for an escape, for a weapon, for anything, but there was nowhere to go. The only window was a small slit high on the wall, too narrow for a child to pass through. The only exit was the door where she was waiting. The scratching stopped, replaced by a soft, rhythmic thudding. Thud. Thud, thud. As if she were gently knocking her head against the wood. The ground was so cold, Okoro, the voice murmured. Conversational yet bone-chilling, so dark. But I did not forget you. I thought of you every moment. I thought of how you smiled at me as you mixed the poison in my palm wine. I thought of your hands around my throat. I thought of the dirt falling on my face. Every word was a nail in Okoro's coffin. He could feel the air in the hut growing colder, the flame in his small oil lamp flickering as if in a phantom breeze. He was trapped. Trapped with the ghost of his own making. The thudding grew louder, more insistent. It was no longer a gentle knock. It was a percussive, demanding beat. Suddenly, with a crack that sounded like splintering bone, the wooden bolt on the inside of his door snapped in two. The two pieces fell to the dirt floor with a soft thud. The door, now unlatched, began to slowly, agonizingly, creak open. An inch of black night appeared, then two, then a foot. A gust of that foul, grave-scented air rushed into the hut, extinguishing his lamp and plunging him into absolute darkness. Okoro didn't need to see. He could feel her presence. A cold that was not of this world filled the small space, a weight that pressed down on him, stealing the air from his lungs. In the suffocating blackness, he saw two pinpricks of light ignite, two glowing embers floating in the dark. Her eyes. They fixed on him, burning through the shadows. "You took my gold, Okoro," the voice echoed in the tiny hut, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "You took my beads. You took my life. The earth is a patient banker. It holds our debts, but it always sends a collector." He finally found his voice, but it was a pathetic whimper. "Namdili, forgive me. Please." A sound that might have been a laugh, dry and rustling like dead leaves, filled the air. "Forgiveness. Forgiveness is for the living. Okoro, I have brought you something else." He couldn't see her move, but suddenly the cold was right in front of him. He felt a touch on his face, a hand that was brittle and cold as stone, caked with dry soil. It traced the line of his jaw, his lips, his neck. He was paralyzed by a terror so complete, it felt like death itself. "The debt must be paid," the whisper continued, right in his ear. "My gold is now scattered. My beads are broken, but you are whole. The earth is hungry, Okoro, and I promised it a meal." The villagers found Okoro's hut the next morning. The door was wide open, swinging gently in the morning breeze. Inside, everything was undisturbed, save for the broken bolt on the floor. Okoro himself was gone. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, nothing. He had simply vanished. But outside, behind the hut, the grave from which Namdili had crawled was no longer open. The earth was smooth and flat, as if it had never been disturbed, and the villagers, glancing at it with a new and profound fear, swore that the patch of ground looked just a little bit taller than it had the day before. They say Namdili was never seen again. Her debt was paid, and from that day on, no one in Umiofia ever dared to walk past Okoro's abandoned hut after dark, for fear of hearing a faint, whispery voice on the wind, counting its treasure in the cold, silent ground. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into the darkness. Until next time, sleep well. From that night onward, Okoro knew no peace. A relentless dread followed him, a shadow that clung to him closer than his own skin. Every meal was a shared one. When he ate, he could hear the ghost of her chewing beside him, a faint, wet sound that turned his food to ash in his mouth. Bathing became a trial of terror. As he splashed water over his body, he'd catch a glimpse of her reflection in the shimmering surface, standing just behind him, her form wavering but her presence unmistakable. He'd spin around, his heart hammering against his ribs, only to find the empty, steamy air of his wash hut. Sleep offered no escape. He'd lie on his mat, muscles tight, listening to every creak of the hut, every rustle of the thatch roof. Just as exhaustion would begin to claim him, the bed would dip, a subtle but definite weight settling beside him, as if someone had just lain down. He'd feel the warmth of a body that wasn't there, smell a perfume of grave dirt and wilted flowers. He'd leap up, screaming into the darkness. But the only response was the mocking echo of his own voice. The village began to whisper. They saw the fear etched onto Okoro's face, the way his eyes darted around, the way he flinched at sudden noises. He grew thin, his skin stretched tight over his bones, his once proud posture now a permanent stoop of fear. Desperate, Okoro stumbled through the pre-dawn mist to the hut of the old herbalist, a man whose eyes held the wisdom of generations. The herbalist's hut was thick with the scent of dried leaves, potent roots, and burning incense. Okoro, trembling, explained his torment, his voice a hoarse whisper. The old man listened patiently, his gaze never leaving Okoro's face. Without a word, he took a small leather pouch and scattered a handful of cowrie shells onto a woven mat. He stared at the shells, his brow furrowed in concentration, murmuring ancient words under his breath. The air in the hut grew heavy, charged with unseen energy. Finally, the herbalist looked up, and his eyes, deep and knowing, seemed to pierce right through Okoro's soul. He spoke, his voice low and raspy like dry leaves skittering across the ground. "The spirit that follows you," he said, "is not some random malevolent force from the forest. It is not a mischievous nature spirit you have offended." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "It is from the grave you made with your own hands." The words hit Okoro like a physical blow. A guttural scream tore from his throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. "But she is dead. I made sure of it. She is dead," he shrieked, clutching his head. The herbalist's face was grim. He took a small gourd of red palm oil and spat a thick stream onto the dusty ground outside his hut. The red liquid sizzled for a moment, looking like a fresh drop of blood on the earth. The old man's voice was cold, chilling Okoro to the bone. "Then why," he asked softly, "do I hear her footsteps outside my hut right now?" Okoro didn't wait for another word. He fled. He ran with a speed born of absolute terror, his feet pounding the earth, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. He didn't see the path. He didn't feel the sharp stones that cut his feet. He just ran, driven by a singular, horrifying image, Namdili waiting for him. He burst into his own compound, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with panic. And there she was. The sight stopped him dead in his tracks. All the air left his lungs. She was sitting calmly under the shade of the large mango tree in the center of his yard, the very tree where they had once shared secrets and laughter. She was wearing the same vibrant wrapper she had been buried in, the colors now muted by dirt and time, yet still recognizable. Her form was solid, real, not the shimmering specter of his nightmares. Her skin was pale, her lips tinged with blue, but it was her. Her voice, when she spoke, was shockingly gentle, the same soft cadence he remembered. But her eyes were not the same. They burned with a cold, intense fire, an inferno of betrayal and sorrow that seemed to scorch his very soul. "Okoro?" she said, her voice a quiet breeze that carried a storm within it. "Why did you do it?" The question was simple, yet it held the weight of eternity. It shattered the last of his bravado, the last of his denial. His legs gave way, and he collapsed onto his knees in the dust, a broken man. "Forgive me, Namdili. Forgive me," he sobbed, his face buried in his hands. "It was the devil. The devil entered me." She laughed. It was not a sound of mirth or joy. It was a soft, hollow sound, like the rustling of dead leaves, filled with an ancient, chilling sorrow. The sound slithered into Okoro's ears and coiled in his gut. "No, Okoro," she said, her burning eyes never leaving him. "The devil is not to blame. He only enters because your heart first opens the door." As she spoke those final words, a deep rumble started beneath the ground. The very earth began to shake, not violently, but with a slow, deliberate tremor. The mango tree shuddered, dropping its leaves like tears. Okoro looked down in horror. From beneath the soil, hands began to rise, not just one or two, but dozens. Gnarled, earthy hands, caked in the rich, dark soil of the land. They were the hands of the ancestors, the hands of the forgotten ones, the hands of the village elders who had once warned him about his pride and his temper, whose wisdom he had arrogantly dismissed. They were hands that had tilled this land, built this village, and now they were reaching for him. They grabbed his ankles with surprising strength, their grip cold and unyielding. They were not fast. They were methodical, relentless. Okoro screamed, a raw, primal sound of a man being dragged to his doom. He clawed at the dirt, his fingers scrabbling for purchase, but it was useless. The hands pulled him slowly, inexorably, toward the fresh mound of earth behind his own hut, toward the grave he had dug for Nimdale. He screamed for help, for his neighbors, for anyone. But no one came. In the surrounding huts, the villagers heard his cries. They looked at each other, their faces grim in the flickering firelight, and they did not move. An old proverb was whispered from hut to hut, a truth as old as the village itself. A man who kills the innocent digs his own grave with a golden shovel. By the time the first rays of dawn painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, an eerie silence had fallen over Okoro's compound. His hut stood empty, the door swinging gently in the morning breeze. The only evidence of the night's terror was a set of deep drag marks in the dirt, leading from the base of the mango tree directly to the grave behind the house. The earth on the grave looked freshly disturbed, as if it had recently been opened and closed again. And there, etched into the soft morning dirt beside the grave, were two shadows. They were not cast by the sun, which was still too low in the sky. They seemed to be imprinted on the very ground itself, a permanent stain. One shadow was clearly that of a man, his form twisted in a silent scream. The other, right beside it, was the shadow of a woman, standing tall and serene. And they remained there, side by side, a timeless warning to all who passed.